Since you clicked on this video, I think it's important to first begin by explaining the strange title. Did period underwear exist during ancient Roman times? Maybe? Recently, I've gone down a personal research rabbit hole of exploring historical undergarments from less spoken about time periods. I've been wearing historical fashion every day for some years now, so I think about historical underwear a lot. And naturally, that led me into the realm of ancient Greece, and by default ancient Rome, as there's a lot of overlap. And it got me thinking about historical menstruation options in earlier eras. I should mention, this is absolutely not a comprehensive body of research regarding this topic, but rather this is what I've discovered during another one of my amateur research journeys. When it comes to historical menstruation options, there is so little evidence, in particular the further back we go. We have some information that points towards period aprons being used in Georgian England during the 18th century. Abby Cox has a wonderful video on this topic, which I've linked below, and I highly recommend watching it as it's very well researched and super informative. I also regularly use 18th century period aprons myself that I've made, and they work really well. In the Victorian period, there's evidence of menstruation belts, also called sanitary belts, available for purchase and use. In 1896, for instance, Johnson & Johnson began selling sanitary napkins for ladies, potentially the first disposable and commercially available pads, these ones being made of cotton and gauze. When it comes to antiquity period options, there is an even greater lack of information. But after discovering one ancient undergarment, it got me thinking, could this perhaps be a viable menstruation option? During the ancient Roman period, people of all genders wore the subligaculum, which is essentially a loincloth, so I wouldn't find it too far-fetched that these were also used as a sort of period underwear. The way that menstruation is viewed differs greatly from culture to culture, and this is also the case historically, so it is hard to say exactly how the majority of ancient Romans viewed menstruation, but my guess is that it was stigmatized because there's a ridiculous quote by Pliny the Elder published in 77 CE where he states, "Contact with it, the menstrual blood, turns new wine sour, crops touched by it become barren, hives of bees die." So yeah, it seems at least some of the men in the ancient Roman society did not find menstruation as normal as I do. The Science Museum has a wonderful article on the topic of historical menstruation, and they mentioned that in the 4th century, Hypatia, who was the first female mathematician, may have thrown a used menstrual cloth at a man in an effort to get him to go away. In addition to utilizing the subligaculum to catch menstrual blood, the VAM mentions in an article that in ancient Greece, lint wrapped around wood was used as a tampon. And since there is a lot of crossover with ancient Greece and ancient Rome, perhaps menstruating ancient Romans also sometimes utilized these early tampons, but we can't know for sure. Now, a note on free bleeding. Free bleeding is defined as the practice of menstruating without blocking or collecting period flow. There is some chance that free bleeding may have been a prevalent menstruation option in ancient Rome, though I'm not sure how probable this would have been unless a loincloth couldn't be afforded, but it's hard to say for certain. A big part of why free bleeding is frowned down upon in many cultures is due to stigma surrounding menstruation and menstrual blood. In some indigenous hunter-gatherer societies, for instance, menstruation is viewed very positively, and so in these communities, it might perhaps be more likely that free bleeding is a common occurrence, due to it not being viewed negatively. Free bleeding may not be a comfortable option for some menstruating people, which is very much a personal choice, but I believe this further expresses how so much of the shame and secrecy that exists around menstruation is due to menstrual taboo in societal interpretation. Because there are so few records from the antiquity period regarding menstruation, it would be hard to say what ancient Roman society thought about the practice of free bleeding, which is why I would find it more probable that the subligaculum was the menstruation garment of choice. Due to the fact we know it existed during the period and it was worn, we just don't know in what context and if it was for sports or theater or what exactly. Well, luckily, I'm about to start my own period, so I thought it'd be fun to make my own subligaculum and test it out on one of my heaviest days. But before I embark on my own experimental archaeology journey, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, June's Journey. June's Journey is a super fun, free-to-download mobile game where you can find hidden objects in vibrant and beautifully crafted scenes. The game is set in the glamour of the 1920s, so it's full of beautiful Art Deco decor and super cute 1920s outfits, and you follow the protagonist, June Parker, who is trying to solve the murder of her sister. But along the way, she uncovers many of her family's secrets. Now, I did my master's degree in creative writing, and I love a good story, and sometimes the plot twists that happen in this murder mystery game are so unexpected. In addition to having a captivating storyline and a pretty amazing vintage setting, you can also customize and remodel your very own mansion and garden island. I love to decorate mine with seasonal items especially. I personally play June's Journey when I want to relax a little and focus on a game that is engaging and entertaining, but still soothing for my mind. I also find it very satisfying to discover all the hidden mystery items in a scene, and the scenes are so cute. I feel like I want to live in them. Download June's Journey for free by clicking the link below in the description or via the QR code on the screen. June's Journey is available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on PC through Facebook Games, so there's many ways to play. I seriously just find the game so much fun, and I hope you enjoy the game as much as I have. Thank you so much again to June's Journey for sponsoring this video, and now let's try and figure out how to make a subligaculum so that way I can try wearing it and see whether or not it's actually an effective thing for menstruation. It is the day of the experiment, which means that I'm going to have to make this subligaculum. Wow, I can never say this word. That way I can wear it throughout the day and see whether or not it actually holds up to the task. Now, I have two ideas. I'm planning to make one out of this wool fabric here to see if it is more absorbent or if it works better than the linen option here. So I'm basically going to make two versions now, and I'm going to see which of the two seems to be more effective. Now, I am currently on day 2 of my period, which means that there is still going to be plenty of material to work with because it is still a very heavy day for me. Normally with these subligaculums, there is some sewing involved, but I've kind of been taking this new approach to sewing where unless something works, I'm not going to spend the couple of hours to hand stitch even a very simple garment. So I've decided I'm just going to cut the fabric out and wear it as is with the fraying edges, because just one day of wear and one wash isn't going to be enough to actually cause it to unravel. And then if it actually works for me, I'm going to stitch up the edges and properly make the garment and then be able to wear it actually in real life if I want to. Versus the other approach of sewing it all now and then turns out it didn't even work and then I just spent an extra 2 or 3 hours making something that I didn't really actually need to. Because the reality is whether or not the edges are finished doesn't change its effectiveness for this experiment. The way I plan to go about the day is to check in every 2 hours. I have a feeling that the wool one is going to be a lot more effective than the linen one, and thankfully wool directly against my skin doesn't bother me that much because I can imagine that this would not be a fun experience for a lot of people, especially if you don't like rough fabrics against your skin. This wool though is not the roughest that I've felt. I've definitely experienced much rougher wools, so it could be a lot worse. So yeah, I'm gonna figure out how these garments were maybe constructed and take you all along for the process. See you in a minute. I realized that my keychain was looking a little bit droopy in that last video, so I've pulled it a bit to make it a little bit more presentable or something, whatever that means. So the way that I'm going to approach cutting the fabric for this subligaculum is that it is essentially almost like a T-shaped garment, except instead of there just being like a flat top on the T, there's little kind of edges. So I'm going to basically take a piece of fabric, put it on the fold, and cut out this specific shape. But I want there to be plenty of width for the part that gets wrapped underneath me. Now I want to make sure that there's all of that extra fabric because that fabric is essentially going to serve as the container to be able to collect and hold all of the blood. So I want to make sure that there's plenty of fabric there, that way we don't have any leaking issues throughout the day. It might still happen, but I'm trying to do my best to prevent that from happening as much as possible. And I found this wonderful diagram which shows how it is wrapped, and I will be trying it all for you on later too over some other garments, that way it's all appropriate and everything. So yeah, let's get to cutting. As you can see, I'm in a very red mood today. I wanted my outfit to match my menstruation. This is a working class bedgown that I made, and a pair of my indigenous Volga Tatar ishtan, which my ancestors used to wear historically and have for a very, very long time. And I was looking at them and I was like, wow, actually these would make amazing period underwear as well, I bet. And they're already red, so I mean, that's great. So yeah, perhaps that's an experiment for another time in my personal life. But I've cut out the subligaculum, as you can see. It's this big strip of fabric. And it was just based off of some simple measurements. And what I realized is that this wool actually does not fray because it's boiled. So that means I don't even have to finish these edges necessarily if I don't want to, unless I want a prettier look. And also, the ends were long enough that I actually didn't need to make any ties. I could just knot it, so even less sewing. So I'm going to try this on and show you all how it gets wrapped. And then the experiment is going to begin. I'll try these on over the ishtan because of obvious reasons, but for the actual experiment, I will be just wearing them directly on my skin. I'm making the wool version first, and to see if it all works okay, and if the shape is all right, because I kind of just eyeballed it and used some very basic measurements of myself. Then I'm going to move on to cutting out in linen and see if any adjustments need to be made to any of the measurements. All right, so the first things first, I'm going to take the T-shaped edges and wrap them at my waist. And I'm just gonna do I kind of call it surgical knot, which someone pointed out in one of my last videos about how the knot I was doing is basically what surgeons were doing. So thank you to that person, because now I have a term for it. But as you can see, it's now on me. It's all good. And then I'm going to take the dangly part back here, my tail, and I'm gonna take it between my legs, and it's gonna be all bunched up, kind of like my ishtan are, and I'm going to take this part and put it underneath the knot, feed it through, like this. Yeah, now I've got some underwear going. And I think that this could have been a little bit longer, but I've also got quite a lot of bulk here because of the ishtan, so maybe not. I did try and make it about the length of how it was shown in the diagram, but I think it maybe needs to even be floor length, quite long. And then this part can just be folded over the front there. I think for the linen one, I'll just make it a little bit longer, but that's gonna stay put. And I can also put 2 clips here, and it was worn sometimes with a belt over it, I think specifically for ancient Roman men, though I'm not completely sure. But as you can see, there's plenty of gathered fabric at the crotch, the nether regions. I'm trying to use all of the appropriate terms for social media so that way I don't get into trouble. So I think it should work for my intended purpose. And I think this looks really cute. What do you all think? Historical stuff is so weird, and I feel like I've reached a new level of exposure on the internet. Anything for experimental archaeology. I'm kind of feeling excited about this. I feel like it's not going to be a complete disaster, so that'll be good for it to not be a complete disaster. I'll cut out the linen one now and try that one on quickly so you can see both, and then the experiment is going to properly begin. So you can see here the differences in lengths for these two. The wool one is about, I would say, maybe 8 inches shorter than the linen one, and I'm hoping that that little excess bit of length will help for this other version. You can see that it's basically the same shape, just roughly cut out, because this is just an experiment. It doesn't have to be anything fancy or neat. It is an undergarment after all, so with time it's going to be incredibly worn down anyways. And yeah, now I'm going to try the linen one on and then begin the experiment. Cut out the linen one now. It's even longer, so I'm hoping this will help, and let's try it on really quick so we can get started with the day. I hope that these work, because if I'm ever in a pinch and need something reusable to wear for my period, this is such an easy shape to cut out. Don't even need to sew it. Get the fabric all bunched up at my bum. There we go. This one definitely does not feel as thick, but it still feels like it will probably do the trick, especially since these were often worn by people doing sports and in the theater. You can imagine that these would be very interesting as a sort of costume for the stage, especially if there were like fringes and other decorative elements on them. But the fact too that they may have potentially been used as well for a menstruation garment is really cool. And yeah, it just shows us how creative and inventive people throughout all of history were. We like to dehumanize people of the past in present times, I feel like, and kind of consider them to be simple-minded or not particularly intelligent, but that just couldn't be further from the truth. People in the past were incredibly intelligent, and I'm always going to stand up for the humanization of people historically because they laid the foundations for what we have today. And without them, we wouldn't have a lot of what we have today because of their genius and intellect and creative thinking. Anyways, rant done. Let's start the little experiment. I'm gonna go get changed. I'm gonna put on this subligaculum underneath my clothing for the day, and then I'm gonna go out and run my errands. And I'm gonna check in about every 2 hours and see how everything is doing down there. See if any leaking happened or not. And I'm going to report to all of you what the situation is. And hopefully it's not a situation. All right, see you in a little bit. So it is currently 4 o'clock, which means that I have gotten through about 3 hours of this. I set alarms for every 2 hours to check on everything to make sure nothing is leaking. That way I can also tell if there is a leak, at what point does it start happening, because I think that's also useful information to know is like what is the limit point for this, at least accounting for my specific factors, like my flow rate for instance. During this last little period of time, I ate lunch, I did a little bit of computer work because I'm currently editing the manuscript for my very first poetry book, which is so exciting. I'm planning for it to be out at the end of the year, so I will keep everyone updated in the community tab and on my other social media pages. But yeah, this has definitely been a dream come true for me because I have been wanting to release a poetry book since I very seriously started working on poetry when I was about 13. So it's a very long time coming, and obviously I have expanded a lot as a writer since then, thankfully. Because yeah, some of my poems when I was 13, ooh, I don't even know where to begin. Angsty teenage poetry is a genre of its own. I set the first alarm for 3:20 and I checked right around then, and I'm pleased to report that there's still no leaking, so everything's good. The subligaculum apparently works at least for 2 hours, so that's nice to know. My next alarm is in about an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm going to get ready to go out and run errands as well as go on a little hike. I know, brave, going on a hike while on my second day of my period and whilst having quite a precarious situation going on here that may or may not work. But today just feels like a hike day, so I really want to go out and get some exercise, spend some time in nature. All right, well, I will check back in an hour and 20 minutes. Hello everyone and welcome to my bathroom. It is currently about 6:50. So I did a little check about 2 hours ago and everything was still okay. And I just had another check now and everything is okay still as well. So I'm still not having any leaking, which is great news. And now I'm going to go out and go for a hike. That's why I did this other check a little bit early because I just wanted to have that all out of the way with. That way I can go outside before it gets dark. And yeah, I'll check back in once I'm outside and see how it all keeps going. All right, so I'm out for a hike. And so far everything's going really, really well. And I think that this wool option is working super well because, yeah, just not having any problems. Can't feel any leakage or anything going on. So that's a success. There were some people coming, so I had to stop the recording. Even after all of this time, I still feel really awkward when people are watching me film. But I'm continuing my walk and something in the bushes over there. Oh, yeah, blackbird. Oh, it's a bird. And one thing that I didn't mention earlier is that I think my period is actually my favorite week of the month. And that might sound very strange because, yeah, most people really don't like that time. But even though I experience pain and some discomfort, quite a bit of it sometimes, in fact, there's just something about it that feels so renewing for me. And I also recognize that that very much comes from a position of privilege because there are plenty of people that experience menstrual conditions like PCOS or endometriosis. I have lots of friends who experience that, for instance. I can see it, how life-altering it is for them and how debilitating it can be. So I don't want to neglect to mention that nuance because I think that's really important to discuss. I don't think people in this world always realize how much menstrual conditions can impact other people. But as someone that suffers with other chronic health issues that aren't menstruation related, I do at least somewhat know the experience of how health can impact your day-to-day experience of life. But for me, menstruation is just really a time of being able to connect with my body and feeling sort of like a fresh start for the next moon cycle. I think it's amazing how the average period is 28, 29 days a lot of the time, and that's the same as the moon. I think that there's just so much beauty in that. For instance, in the Tatar language, the word for moon is ay, and it's also the word for month. And the word for menstruation is aylik, which it basically means moon-like or month-like. So I think it's really beautiful how there's all this connection with the moon and menstruation. But yeah, aside from it being really humid and wearing a wool subligaculum, kind of making it hotter, overall it feels really nice. I actually feel really comfortable. It doesn't feel itchy or anything because of the wool. And yeah, I feel like everything is being well absorbed and I don't feel like nervous or stressed that something's going to happen. And also in my bag here, I have some like backup supplies in case something does happen. One thing I did notice though is it's really hard to use the bathroom. It's not as hard as maybe some like modern outfits, but it's much harder than say with wearing Victorian undergarments, and it's a little bit harder than wearing, I guess, modern undergarments. But it's not the most difficult experience of having to like spontaneously go to the bathroom somewhere in the woods. So it could be worse. All right, well, I'm gonna keep on walking and check back in a little bit later. Storm is coming soon, so I think it's time for me to go back home so I don't get caught in rain and thunder. So it is currently about 10 in the evening, and I managed to get caught at the very end of the storm, but I got home before getting completely soaked, so that's nice. Once I got home, I ended up having some dinner, and then when the alarm rang at 9:20, I checked on the subligaculum, and everything is still okay. That means that this wool one has been holding up throughout this whole experiment so far. Now around this time is when I was planning to try out the linen one, because I tend to go to bed around 1 or 2 a.m. a lot of the time these days. So my plan was to have the experiment continue until then, so that would have given me enough time to wear the linen one and see how it compared. But because this wool one is faring quite well, I think I'm actually going to go to bed a little bit earlier, and instead I'm going to do something very brave. I'm going to wear the linen one overnight while I'm sleeping. That means that for a solid 7 hours, the linen subligaculum is what I'm going to be wearing for my period. And I won't be able to check it because I'll be fast asleep. So I'm really curious to see if it's going to hold up in the night, or if it'll be a complete disaster in the morning. A complete crime scene or not, we'll see. But I thought that that would be a little bit more fun because it ups the stakes a tiny bit. You know, everything for experimental archaeology. Alright, well, I'm gonna finish up a little bit more work, do some reading, and start to get ready for bed. And I will talk to you all right before I go to sleep. I hope you all can see me. I've got my linen subligaculum on, and it is now time for bed. And I will report in the morning how things go. I have a feeling it'll be fine. The wool one held up really well, so I'm expecting the linen one to hold up maybe not as well, but somewhat equally. So I have faith in this garment. All right, well, see you all in the morning. Good morning, everyone. So the linen subligaculum was a great success. I had no issues, and that means that it definitely works for its intended purpose. I'm actually really impressed. I feel like these ancient Roman period underwear have been a really big success. And also, if you're ever in a pinch and you have some fabric, this is probably a really effective design choice. As always, whenever I finish one of these experiments, I like to take a bit of time to reflect on everything because, yeah, I just find I process things by giving things space and time. I'm gonna check in and kind of give you a little pros and cons rundown of why I think this might be a nice option for some and why it maybe wouldn't be a good option. Because although it was effective for period supplies, there were a few things that I think should be kept in mind because they lean more towards the con side. And so I want to be able to discuss all of those and just give a bit more of a well-rounded picture of what this experience has been like. I'm going to get started with my day, and I will see you all later. Hello everyone. I have now had an entire week to process the experiment. And yes, it does take me an entire week sometimes to figure out what I want to say about these things. I've come up with a little pros and cons list, and before anyone comments on why I hold my mic in some videos, it's because with this garment specifically, the neckline is too bulky because of all the gathering to clip the mic on or to even put the magnet. It just looks weird or doesn't hold. And also, I just like it. It feels more personal. Every video where I hold the mic, I get a comment about it. I know it's a lav mic. I know it goes on my garment. I work in film. I know lav mics very well, but it's just a very intentional choice because it just feels a bit more personal and comfortable for me. So let's talk about this period garment. Period garment. Get it? Because it's like historical period, but then also like period, like menstruation. I thought it was funny, okay? So the very first pro on my list is that it worked, at least for me in my flow rate and my situation. So that's great, that's super important. I think that that's a success. Another positive is that the subligaculum is extremely easy to make if you're, say, in a pinch and just have some extra fabric laying around. Additionally, it's not very much fabric, so if you were to go to the store or maybe even like a thrift store and find some old sheets to use, it could end up being a very affordable option. It's a fully reusable option, so it's much better for the environment because it doesn't create any waste. And if you use fabric that doesn't fray, you don't even have to sew anything in the end, which is an extra bonus. And lastly, I found the garment extremely comfortable, and I think this would definitely vary depending on the person, because for some people this perhaps wouldn't have been the most comfortable option. And in the cons, I'm going to talk about why it perhaps would not be comfortable for people. So now moving on to the cons, and I think there's about an equal amount of each, so it really will just depend on whatever you're personally looking for. So the first con is that it was actually pretty bulky of a garment. I wear really loose and flowy garments generally because the historical styles that I opt for are the ones where they adjust with you throughout the normal body changes that you experience in life, versus some of the more tighter fitting styles that maybe exist like in the mid to late Victorian period. I tend to turn more towards like ketons and wrappers and things like that these days that I just don't have to adjust. Because of that, it was less apparent that I was wearing the subligaculum, but you could still kind of tell. Like, I definitely don't think it looked like my usual body silhouette. If you don't care about that kind of thing though, then this one doesn't really matter. The subligaculum does also get kind of hot, especially if you were to wear the wool one on a really hot day. I think it might be tough because you've got this piece of bunched up wool in your crotch area that is just like sitting there throughout the day, and if it's hot then you're just like sweaty. And even though wool is a brilliant material even in hotter weather, especially tropical wool and other lightweight wools, it still was just one of those situations where because of the sheer amount of the fabric and because of like how against the body it was, it didn't leave as much room for breathing, even though of course wool is a very breathable fabric. Does that make any sense? I think it does. The other thing is that the subligaculum may not be suitable for people with very heavy menstrual flows. I do not have a heavy menstrual flow. I would say mine is like medium. So because of that, I can only do the experiment based off of my own body. But perhaps if one of you has a heavy menstrual flow and you decide to try this out, maybe you can leave a comment and let us know if you feel comfortable with doing that. It'd be really interesting in general just to have some more perspectives on what this garment is like for other people. Additionally, I feel like the wool one worked best. The linen one worked well too, but I think I preferred just the absorbency of the wool one. And wool isn't always the most accessible fabric for a lot of people, and it can end up being kind of expensive. So while I said in the pros that this is an affordable option due to like the way it is and the cut of the fabric and that you can use scrap fabrics, making it out of wool and depending upon your region and what you have accessible to you might end up making this more expensive. And if you do choose wool, some people might also find wool to be very uncomfortable directly against the skin, even these softer wools. So that would mean that the wool option would not be the one for you if that's the case. And I guess the final point is that the subligaculum isn't exactly the most flattering, but I don't really care about being flattering when I'm on my period. And that shouldn't even really matter anyways, as long as the person wearing it feels comfortable. So yeah, this is just an additional little point. Whether or not it matters to you will depend upon you. I think that's everything I have to say about the subligaculum and this experiment. Overall, this was a really fun experimental archaeology video to make, and I'm really glad that I did it. I want to give another really big thanks to the sponsor of this video, June's Journey. Download June's Journey today for free by using the QR code on the screen or by clicking the link in the description box. June's Journey is available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on the PC through Facebook Games. Alright, well thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks for another video.